to order, please. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we do have one individual who has signed up for public comment, and that is Eric Donaldson. Eric, please come up here and use the microphone, please. Or you can use the one on the table right there. No, it's not up for some reason. Now it is, I think. No, we'll try again. Sorry, Eric.
All right, testing. Okay, so we got it. Hi, my name is Eric Donaldson. I am the director at Rib Mountain Metropolitan Sewerage District, and I'm here to comment on agenda item 6A3 about the Rib Mountain Metro Sewerage District appointments. The Rib Mountain Metro commissioners met Tuesday this week and discussed the commissioner situation. And we were disappointed in the non-approval of Craig Mortensen at an August meeting. It was disappointment that a man of good character and a quality commissioner like Craig was not approved. We respect and honor the county's decision, and we want to take part in the process of appointing or reappointing commissioners. And the process that we advocate for is a process that we've used for the better part of 4 decades, which is if we're for appointments, if we've got a vacancy, the director or somebody at the Metro contacts the communities to ask for volunteers, and then we have them fill out an application. The commissioners interview the candidates and then make a recommendation to the county administrator, and the county board of supervisors approves or disapproves of the candidate. For reappointments, the other 4 commissioners vote on whether or not to make a recommendation to reappoint the commissioner, and then we send a letter over to the county administrator indicating as such, and then the county supervisors vote to approve or disapprove that. So that's my comments. I'll stick around for 6A3 if there's any questions of me, and I'd be happy to respond now or at 6A3.
Okay, thank you, Eric. With that, we will move on to item number 4 on the agenda, approval of the minutes of the July 13th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Langenhahn, second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion on that agenda item and that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the July 13th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. And we, just so everybody's clear, we have several people joining us via WebEx. We have the Vice Chair, Mr. McEwen, Craig McEwen is with us, Ann Lemmer, and Matt Boots. Thank you. We'll move on to policy issue and potential committee determination, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy, and a discussion and possible action by the executive committee. A request to provide Robert's Rules of Order to each of the board members. That was a request that was presented by one of the supervisors at our last meeting, and I put it on the executive committee for discussion. The one comment, I had a discussion with the administrator and was thought that there's an easy way to solve that, and that is simply provide a link on their iPad to Robert's Rules of Order that is virtual. And anybody wants to read them, they're available. And so we could suffice that way. If we choose to offer that option through CCIT, they could download the link directly to the iPads. I'll open it up for discussion. Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious. Now, I know the book, I think it's the 12th edition, that's like a $20 book. Are you saying that entire thing is online through their website, or what are you saying?
That was going to be my little caveat to, there's a lot of sites online that give you the, I'd say Reader's Digest version, but they're not, I mean, of course, you'd run into copyright if you just put the whole thing on there when you didn't have to pay for it, right? So, if there was a request to kind of go the easy button route that's alluded to by the chair, staff could put together a link to a resource that, in our estimate, is a reasonable substitute as opposed to the 2.5-inch thick book, which we certainly can procure if you'd want. I'll just tell you, my practice normally is to first search online to find out where the reference is to the actual book and then go there if I need clarification. But that was just a short conversation I had with the chair, but to your point, it's not the actual book that's online. There are a number of sites where they give you, essentially Robert's Rules summaries.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would agree with that. I just Googled right now Robert's Rules cheat sheet, University of, I won't endorse them, came up and you get 5 pages of information. I do recall, I don't know if it was WCA or maybe another location where it had just like a half sheet that was laminated, or maybe we passed it out. I'm not quite sure. I apologize. I was going to bring that and I did not. But it gives you some of the basics of subsidiary motions and such. I would prefer that over a tome of Robert's Rules, which I've tried to delve into at different times, and I just find myself confused. So if we can provide something like that, I think it would help.
And on top of it, I mean, the cost, there is a $20 plus cost for each copy of that book. So, I mean, when you're talking 38 members, it is $1,000, and is there the value? We have a parliamentarian, and any time that there's a question, the parliamentarian can answer the question by looking in his copy of the official Robert's Rules and try to answer it. Sometimes it does, as Supervisor Dickinson clearly alluded to, require quite a bit of research to figure out the actual process that Robert's Rules is calling for. But we can clearly do that. Is there any other discussion? Mike, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to expand on that and give a little, I guess, suggestion or plug. If members have specific questions about a procedure they want to do or something they want to accomplish at a meeting that they can't figure out how to do, I'm happy to talk about that for a meeting. If you have a question during a meeting, I am happy to endeavor to answer. Like Lance, I often in a pinch will do a Google search to point me in the right direction of where in Roberts. I also have it electronically on my laptop so I can search it that way, but it is a very complicated piece of literature to find anything in. I'm happy also if there are any particular topics that the board wants to be trained on as far as how to do something. We did one of those at the outset of this term, but certainly we can revisit that as well. So just a couple thoughts in case anyone's interested.
Okay, any other discussion? I think the solution then, I don't know we need a motion, but I think we will provide a link to what is considered the most recent site that has the most complete set of Robert's Rules.
Chair Gibbs, it's Supervisor Lemmer.
Supervisor Lemmer, please.
Thanks. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time then to discuss this, but based on the public commenter from the Health and Human Services meeting, I asked our parliamentarian for some information on whether or not that was handled well. Our chair gavelled several times to try and get a speaker to stop talking, and that person never stopped talking.
Supervisor Lemmer, could I just interrupt you? We do have that discussion. If you look on the educational presentation on item 7D, we will.
Okay.
we'll discuss that at 7D, please.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on Roberts? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
The only thing I would say, I think we can provide a link, that's fine. I think the cheat sheet is really what people need, because that gives things like, can you interrupt? Do you need a second? Is it amendable, debatable? Those kind of things. I think that is probably the crux of the important information.
And the clerk said she will provide the cheat sheet to everybody again, even though it was provided by WC, I think, like you said, at the beginning of the term. So, all right. Anything else under that agenda item? Okay, we will move on to item number 2, the use of Lakeview Conference Center for City of Wausau polling location. Administrator, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So earlier this year, I was contacted by the city of Wausau in response to, I think, some concerns they had over an existing polling location. And specifically, they had some questions about Lakeview Conference Center, and I reached out to Kim. It is not unusual. We have previously utilized county-owned facilities for polling locations. Eastgate Hall is one such location, and I know a lot of other municipalities, villages, and town halls, of course, are polling locations. So we do have representatives from the city here, the clerk and deputy clerk, to answer any questions you may have. I just didn't know what process. No one's called me and asked me that before. So wanted to at least take it here, and you guys give me the blessing if you are willing to do so, to at least execute the contract or the agreement that we would need to do with the city for the use of that Lakeview Conference Center. But again, we have the clerk and deputy clerk here to answer any questions.
I'll throw it out for questions and comments. I think, but I would defer to the clerk and the deputy clerk. I believe they're having some challenges with one of the facilities that they're currently using, that district or in that ward. And the accessibility of this facility, as long as it's completed for the election, which the first election, I believe, is going to be February, which would be the primary in 2024.
That is,
Oh,
sorry,
go ahead,
that
go
is
ahead, please.
correct. February 20th. We're not counting down yet, but we currently utilize Pilgrim Lutheran Church for districts 1 and 2 on the southeast side of Wausau as one of our polling locations. For each election, the Wisconsin Elections Commission sends around auditors to conduct an accessibility audit of each polling site. And when we got that report back this spring, there were some concerns about that facility, so we started looking at ways to address those. And one of the ways to address those concerns would be to move the polling site to the Lakeview Conference Center, which we really like it because it has an automatic door. It has very wide hallways, so we don't have to worry about wheelchairs fitting in pathways to voting. And it has several accessible handicap spots, which our current location is limited in.
Okay, questions by the committee? Supervisor Robinson, please.
I would move that we direct the administrator to enter into an agreement with the city relative to establishing Lakeview Conference Center as a polling place.
And seconded by Supervisor Mask. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion to approve and authorize the administrator to enter into a contract for the use of the Lakeview Conference Center for a Wausau polling location, signify by saying aye.
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 I
Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 6A3, opportunity for input to the county administrator relative to the process to utilize for the Rib Mountain Metro Sewerage District appointment. Supervisor, or Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Donaldson kind of stole my thunder. I really asked to put this on the agenda just to get some insight from you, some guidance. As Mr. Donaldson referenced, the process for these appointments, as I understand them, is consistent with that process that Mr. Donaldson laid out, namely that the county administrator would receive recommendations from Rib Mountain Metro in the event of a new appointment. And, that's, I guess, in my experience, it's largely consistent with how we've done other appointments. I try to advertise the appointment, do an application process through our online website. If I have multiple individuals, I try to speak with those individuals that, based on their application, I think are well-suited based on the mission as set forth in the board rules of the specific entity to which the county board is considering appointment. But I just wanted to, I realized that the board voted down my last, the name I brought forward, so I wanted to make sure if there's something you're expecting me to do, let me know what that is and I'll strive to do it. As I've drafted in an email to all board members previously, I had reached out to all of the municipalities similarly to the process that Mr. Donaldson laid out that the Metro uses. If that's something that you want me to make sure I do, that I confer with the chief elected or appointed official from those municipalities. Just any guidance you could give would be certainly welcome, because I don't endeavor to bring forward names that you don't feel worthy of appointment. So just looking for any guidance. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
So I looked at 20.09 of the stats, and I think and it calls for the county board to approve, and given we've got a county administrator system, that is you putting forth the name and doing it, I would encourage a little bit more independence and objectivity and have that housed more internally. I think that the legislature has entrusted or tried to create a situation where there was somewhat of an independence. And I'm always concerned about, I'm going to, for lack of a better term, call it sometimes incestuous relationships where groups sort of bring their own members forward. And I don't know that that's always in the best system for getting the best people on. And I think that having an independent process by which you would go through, advertise it, you could consult with others and bring forth the name of the most qualified person, I think would be beneficial.
Other discussion? Other discussion? Other directions for the administrator? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
So my question is, who's initially making the recommendation? It's not you, correct? I mean, it's coming, your recommendation to the board is you, but it's a recommendation from another body to you, correct?
That's historically how it's operated, and I understand, I think, building on Supervisor Robinson's point, if the desire is to change that, I certainly understand the rationale and logic, and I can do that. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of meeting the expectation. But you're right. Historically, the Metropolitan Sewerage District had been the ones bringing forward a name in the event, as Mr. Donaldson referenced, of a vacancy. On a reappointment, that process was normally that if the individual was interested in being reappointed, they would draft a letter indicating that.
So personally, I don't see a reason to change anything in the process. In my opinion, it would be back to that group to then bring forward another person. That it wouldn't fall upon you, it would fall upon that group to find someone else and then bring that person forward. Just like in any other kind of appointment process. Maybe I'm missing that. I just don't see there's a reason to change it in this one particular subjective example.
Sure. I would say, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify, the process for that body is somewhat different than, say, for example, if there's a vacancy on the Social Services Board. The Social Services Board, if an individual resigns, they are required to resign to me. They make me aware of that resignation. I would then go back to our online list of where we've allowed people to apply and express interest, see who has done that. evaluate those candidates, I endeavor to always speak with the chair of the specific body to say, hey, this is the individual. If you have anybody else, I encourage you to have them apply, but I do that kind of initial vetting. The Metropolitan Sewerage District has been historically a little bit different, and it's been as Mr. Donaldson laid out. They know there's going to be a vacancy. They seek out through their own independent application process and have historically suggested a name. I reached out to the last 2 administrators to confirm that that's kind of been the process, as Mr. Donaldson referenced, for about 4 decades. So I wouldn't say it's fundamentally different, but to your question, Supervisor Dickinson, it's a little nuanced. Do I wait for them to bring me a name, or do I kind of institute a more independent process where I solicit the applicants? I could certainly still confer with the Metropolitan Sewerage District, but it's, I guess, who's really driving the process. Historically, it has been the Metro, and the administrator has kind of been on the receiving end of that. So if there's a desire to have it, as Supervisor Robinson referenced, that's not a problem. And in fact, I did reach out and had our website modified to allow for individuals to actually express interest in that body online. That was because historically we hadn't driven that process. It was absent from the list. So I had it added kind of to at least allow people to express interest in 2 locations.
Supervisor Longenau, please. Okay, the thing that I was maybe just a little bit disappointed in the board in how it chose to act, and I still respect what the board did. The board's made its decision. We'll move on. But when we have some questions of the individual, and they're raised, but they're not raised so that the individual can respond to any accusations, that really troubles me when an individual on the board can make an accusation. Yes, he had it backed up with stuff that he filed, but we didn't allow the individual that was being appointed to respond to those. So we didn't bring those questions and questionability of his qualifications to the education meeting and have the individual be able to respond to the accusations that are being made. And so that's, I think, the question the other thing that I think needs to be clarified. And one of the rules, one of the changes that they're looking at, or that what the rules review is looking at, is having those appointments earlier. Now, some of the comment was, well, I didn't know that individual was coming back, or didn't know, and so I couldn't raise the questions. So the process is, the rules review is looking at having those appointments to the board in plenty of time to actually have that process reviewed, or that individual, if there's questions about whatever for that individual that's seeking that position, and whether it's being brought forward by the administrator, or it's being brought forward by the board chair, or being brought forward by, in this case, the Rib Mountain Sewerage District and the 4 municipalities that they serve, and their chief elected officials. That's the part that I really struggle with when we don't allow the individual. We allow accusations to be made, and the board made its decision. Again, the board made its decision. I stand behind it. We're moving forward. But how do we improve the process? And I think that's what the administrator is looking at, is to how do we improve the process so that we put some integrity in, that if the individual is going to be impugned by this board, that he has an ability to respond to any accusations. Supervisor Longenau, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't want to re-debate the prior appointment, and I think that some of the discussion that was just brought up, it really speaks to the broader process instead of the specific process that's in front of us, which has to do with the sewage district, and I think we need to focus on that for these discussions. I guess my question would be, expanding that appointment process up open to the general public on that form, that could create a little bit of an awkward situation where if you do have a recommendation from the sewerage district and you also have somebody from the public apply through that application, you could be faced with a number of applications there to recommend to the board. So I guess my question would be to the administrator, if appropriate, would you bring both those individuals or would you only bring the sewerage district? Like, I'm trying to not have the administrator be in an uncomfortable position. I think if you do it that way, it gets uncomfortable, so.
A fair question. I interpret the statute as Chair Robinson referenced in my duty as the administrators. I don't bring forward a name unless I feel as though the individual is appropriate for appointment. Quite honestly, even if the Metro brought forward a name that I didn't think was appropriate based on the mission and the individual's background, I wouldn't bring that individual forward. I'm not overly concerned if we adopt a process where there's multiple avenues through which an individual can express interest. If an individual expressed interest and was brought forward by the Metro, I would ask them the same questions that I have on our website for individuals, and those are, why are you interested? What about your background? Is such that you believe you're well qualified based on the mission and duties of the organization, and then I ask for some references in the event I wish to follow up with those. So that I don't see that to be overly problematic if I would kind of utilize both avenues through which people could express interest. That isn't overly concerning.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
I think objectivity is the most important thing in process. If we alter this appointment process, then we can alter, in essence, any appointment process to just maybe make it easier, for lack of a better phrase, to fill a seat. Sometimes seats go unfulfilled. Sometimes jobs go unfulfilled, and it might take months. So in that regard, I feel in the process should be that the Rib Mountain Metro Sewerage District, whomever that is, should find another candidate. I don't think it's your responsibility to go find someone. I think it's theirs. They brought forth someone, then you took that, you looked into it, you brought it to the board, and for whatever reason, whether it was whatever the debate was, I don't care about any of that subjectivity. We have the right as a board to turn down anybody for any reason. We don't have to share the reason or whatever. I understand what you're saying, Chair. I understand that, and that's a difficult thing. But ultimately, that responsibility falls on the board, and the board made its decision. So then you would just fall back to the process, and for good feelings or bad, your responsibility is to bring forth someone to our administrator, and then the administrator bring it back to the board. I see no reason in this process to change it, in this example.
The only thing I would say is, as Supervisor Robinson pointed out, it's statutorily, ultimately, the administrator's responsibility to bring forward the name. It's not. That's the statute.
Then what I would say is that would be a rules change if we want to look into, is that something, let me ask that question then. When it comes to this, is there something in our rules to say this is how it works? Do you understand where I'm going with that?
I get that.
Although the statute might say something, is it something that we're aware of as a board? And you're kind of, to me, it seems like you're kind of upsetting the apple cart in that situation. That's all.
If I can, I think that's a very fair question. Past practice has certainly been to receive the recommendation from the Rib Mountain Metro, but there is nothing, to your specific question, in our rules that say that's how it's supposed to work. And again, I did reach out to both Mort McBain and Brad just to confirm that was the past practice, and it appears to be.
Supervisor Mask, please.
Thank you. Just a comment, we declined, the board voted against this individual once, and then it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But we voted twice. In both times, we voted down the appointment. So after the first one, and when it came back to county board, if this individual wanted to defend his place, why didn't he come forward? He had the opportunity because he knew he was being, up for vote again. So I just curious.
I'm not
Had he gotten in
going to
touch
get
with
into
you?
the debate about that, and again, I respect the board's decision, we'll move on.
Okay.
Other discussion? So we have had two recommendations. One, that the administrator started a new process by Supervisor Robinson to follow the process that we use in other more direct board responsibilities, like the Board of Health and others. And we've also had a recommendation that we continue to follow the current practice and past practice, and that is allow the Rib Mountain Sewerage District to bring forward a name and the administrator just forward the name to the full board, doing his vetting process. What's the pleasure of the committee? Supervisor Dickinson.
So my motion would be, if we need a motion, would be to continue the current practice and then review all appointments that are statutory in the same regard, that if the administrator is the one who's supposed to be bringing forth someone in the example, then all such appointments go through that same path. To me, the consistency and objectivity is what matters. We don't just make a specific, because of one situation, we say we're going to do it this way. I don't agree with that. So that would be my motion. Current practice, and then review all of the potential statutory for a decision at a later point. Does that make sense?
Okay. First off, is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion? I think people were a little confused. Supervisor Langenhan, so at this point, the motion dies for lack of a second. Well, at this point, I think we need some more clarification, I think, is what people were looking for. Supervisor Langenhan?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question would be, is that an appropriate, so I agree with the first part of the motion 100%, but the prior motion, but the other question I had is that an appropriate body of work for the executive committee to take up, or would the rules review committee take that up? I just throw that out there for discussion.
Either body could be appropriate. If you wanted to make a rule about it, rules review would be appropriate. If you wanted to provide policy guidance to the administrator, this body could do that as well. So either one would be appropriate.
So I will look to the administrator. Have you gotten clarity on the process?
Maybe I think I can hopefully find a path forward. If I meet with Mr. Donaldson, my sense is that Metro is very interested in identifying a candidate as promptly as possible.
Yes.
Which I think is to Supervisor Dickinson's point, that they start that process and then I review those candidates. I can also solicit applications through our online process that we use for all other appointments. And should anyone express interest in that forum, reach back out to the Metro and have a conversation about that individual. I guess that if that's something you're expecting me to do, I can do that. Again, the statute is, our process hadn't been in compliance or not directly driven by the statute, I guess is my cleanest way of attempting to say that. But it has, as Supervisor Dickinson said or alluded to, it's been past practice for a number of years. If there are concerns about any individual that I bring forward, I will endeavor, as was alluded to bring those names and provide as much notice as possible so that I can look into any such concerns, and if I deem it appropriate, as I have in the past. There was an occasion where I brought a name forward and then I withdrew it. I can adopt that practice as well.
Supervisor Longenau, please.
So I was looking at the rules review minutes for the last meeting, and there's quite a body of work there. And I guess I'll offer a motion. I would move that we direct the administrator to re-engage with the Metropolitan Sewage District, as well as seek outside or from outside applicants. Also requiring that any candidate recommended by the sewage district complete the online application that outside applicants would have to complete. And also direct the executive committee to take up the board appointment processes in the future. So now the lawyer's giving me a weird look. I don't know if I can make that request, right? And I'll happily strike out that second part, because I don't want to repeat that first part.
My look and hesitation is partly because that's like a three-part motion with three different parts, and partly because I don't know that this committee can tackle or alter an appointment process that's statutorily driven. I mean, ultimately, the statute says the administrator makes the appointment, so whatever direction you provide as far as how it gets to that point, I think is what the administrator is looking for, but actually altering the process, I don't think we can do.
Okay. Well, I'll withdraw that motion then.
To withdrew the whole motion or just the?
I'll withdraw the entire motion.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Make a motion, we follow the statute.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded that we follow the statute for the appointment process for the administrator, in particular as it relates to the Rib Mountain Sewerage District, even though that was not part of that was the implied. Supervisor Longenau, please.
I would just ask, and of course I would support said motion, but does the administrator feel that he has direction?
I think I'm good, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion to follow the statute as far as it relates to the administrator's appointment process. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on. Item B, discussion and possible action by the executive committee to forward to the county board for approval. None. Educational presentation committee discussion. Under item 7A, review the county board chairperson's guidelines and expectations. And it was included in your packet. I open it up for discussion. Supervisor Mask, please.
Just a comment, you're really busy.
Yeah. Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things I think I commented about a year and a half ago is the amount of work that we are laying upon the chair, whether it be statutory requirements to be on certain boards, expectations, like in this document here. And I think what that does is it minimizes the candidate pool for the position. It isn't to say that people shouldn't be available if they want to be in that position. That's not it. But some of the conversations we've had in rules review and such has been, when should meetings take place, right? And how many people can attend that meeting at a certain time? And should we be virtual because of that? And when should meetings take place? Should they be, to allow for the staff to be there, or should they be after hours because of time and a half, hourly pay, et cetera? The concern I have with that then is there are so many things that you are expected to do, that this position is expected to do. I really think it needs to be reduced. And I wasn't here when that whole discussion occurred with what the salary should be for the position, what the workload should be. I wasn't part of the board at that time. But I do think there are some things potentially that can either be voluntarily, mentioned as voluntary, and as voluntary could be allowed for others to be identified to attend who are on the board, whether it be a standing committee chair or a member of the executive committee. And I think that would free up some of that, just some of the time. And I think also what it would do, it would allow other board members then to be educated as well and be better board members because of that, if that would make sense. So, for example, one of the things you have on here is or that's on here, not you, but is on here is item 1F, be accessible to supervisors and department heads and holding regular office hours. To me, that should be something that should be voluntary. I think obviously you should be open, but whether you should be in the building, that the chair should be in the building 1 day a week, 8 hours, whatever that is, that's just not something that any board member would potentially be able to do. So it's limiting, again, the potential of someone being the chair. So that's something I'd like to look at. As far as, meeting, like one of these is meeting with county administration, being responsible for administrators' annual evaluation. Is that something that the executive committee, someone from the executive committee could do? And then some of the other items on 2 for the external, again, putting some of these as voluntary. Some of the towns association meetings, sure, I do believe there are people who could show up and assist in that. Is there a requirement to be at the city county IT commission monthly? Could someone else take care of that? And then one of the other things is, the WCA and the NACO, I understand we're part of those organizations, but is there opportunity for other people to be stand-ins for such things? So I said multiple things, but I'm making kind of a general comment that I would hope we would be able to kind of reduce some of the responsibilities to free up that time. Thank you.
Other discussion? Supervisor Robinson, please.
I just would like to make a note. I know that there have been times where the current chair has missed the Towns Association because of either health or other reasons, and I know that he's reached out to me in those cases, and so I think these are not, I don't know that we should look at these necessarily as mandatory, but they're, I think, suggestive and sort of, I think the Towns Association have an expectation that the county have a presence at those meetings there, but I think you raised some good points. Does the office hours at the courthouse have to be a requirement? And I think that based upon some of our agreements, isn't the city-county IT agreement require the county board chair? So I think we'd have to go through and look at perhaps what some of those agreements say. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think that there's a basis, either statutorily or through our rules, to do those. And I don't know if in some cases it says or designee, but that might be a worthwhile evaluation.
Other discussion? I guess just the one comment that I will make, I know that the expectations, when there was consideration that the salary for the board chair was moved up, that's when the discussion centered around, well, if we're going to increase the board chair's salary to a level, whatever that level at the time was almost doubling the chair's salary, then they said, well, if we're going to do that, we're going to have some expectations for that salary increase. We're not just the title of chair, but there's going to be expectations and requirements that go along with that. I'm not arguing either way. I'm just pointing out why the list of expectations was presented was because in some respects the salary was increased significantly. So I point that out only so that it puts context into how it got to where we got it to. Other discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
It's more of a question. So we have the guidelines and expectations before us, and it's sort of a policy document, if you will, because it's not a rule, but it is driven.
It's referred to in the rules to look at.
Right, but the rules also call for, I think,
A review. That's why it's on the agenda.
So how do we review that? Do we approve it? Do we at this meeting?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
You go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, right now on your agenda, it's actually listed under educational. So right now, I don't think you can do anything other than discuss it. But under our rules, I think you could approve, modify it if it's properly agendized to do that.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
And that brings up a question. When this document was created and it wasn't put in the rules, was there a reason it wasn't listed in the rules? Was there a reason that it was done here? Do we have any idea? Because it seems awkward to me that we have both, but John, maybe.
Supervisor Robinson?
As I recall, we grabbed the salary looking at comparable counties, and when it went up, there were some members of the board, and I think particularly Supervisor Zerny at that time, that had a request for after the fact. What does this mean, and how do we do it? Because you had to establish the salaries before the position is filled. And there was sort of develop the guidelines, and I don't know that that's ever been revisited, but it was sort of a sequential thing. The salary went up, then what are we getting for that? In the expectations, the guidelines and expectations was a way for the county board in which to evaluate the performance of a county board chair, and quite honestly, the only time that you can really use it is when you're electing the county board chair. But that was sort of the history. So the salary went up, and then there was a request for, what does that mean?
Because the salary has to be set before papers can be taken out. So December 1st, the salary for the board chair would have to be set for 2024's board chair by November 30th of 2023. Other discussion?
That's how this is Supervisor
Booth, go ahead.
That's how I remembered it also. It had to be because we had the election, and that's why it was. We put together the salaries for every board member, for the new people that were going to try to get on the county board. And that is correct. That is why we did it that way.
Okay, other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
So just my last point on that. It would seem to me that we would develop the expectations and duties and responsibilities. We would say, this is what we want. And like any job description, that pretty much stays relatively consistent, right? And then from there, we would determine how much money that deserves. What you had described was almost flipped. It was almost like, well, we're gonna say this is what the salary is gonna be because the work is being done, and oh, what's that work? And then we kind of develop the responsibilities. It's just a comment. It isn't to say it was wrong or anything, but it would seem to me it was a little bit flipped. So really where I'm going with that is all of these, I think, are good guidelines and expectations and duties and responsibilities within the rules. I would like to get to the place, whether it be in rules, if that's the place where it needs to be done or can be done, that we look at just making maybe some more of this voluntary. and making it clear that it's not that some of this is not a requirement unless it has to be a requirement, and that in those cases of voluntary, there can be appointments made by the chair for others to then develop some of their own skill within the board relationship, if that makes sense.
I understand that. The point I'll make is then I think that if we're going to change what the expectations are, do we then, so it's like the chicken or the egg, right? Do we set the salary again? Do we set the expectations before we set the salary? Or should we go back to setting the salary, set the expectations or set the salary? Because we, again, have till November 30th to set the salary for the incoming new board and the new supervisors. That has to be done before papers are taken out. Supervisor Langenhan. If we're gonna decrease the responsibilities because they were tied to at that point, they were tied.
Well, and this is the thing, Mr. Chair, and this is tangentially related, but that's nothing. I believe there's nothing that we could possibly do to say we're going to require that those pass into the new term, because you could set it at $30,000 by the end of November for this compensation, but a new board could seat and then say, you know what, we're going to adjust all these anyway if they're in the rules. Similar to policy, you could change the policy at any time.
They can change the responsibilities, they can't change the salary.
That's correct. I'm just saying that if we're going to talk about trying to solidify anything, you really can't. This is just supposed to communicate that this is the standard that we want to set it at.
Okay. So obviously, there's no action that can be taken. Is there something that we want to do, or are we going to just leave it to Rules Review to review and bring forward its recommendations about the role and responsibilities? Because it is under the purview of the Executive Committee. Supervisor Robinson?
You have 4 members of or more than 5 members of the Rules Review here. So I think they can take a look at it, and I think we would need to also look at it, just bring it back at some future meeting before the end of November for approval. But I think that there's the ability to look at it, and we probably violated the open meeting law.
We will agendize the Executive Committee as such in the future. Okay, I think we have direction there. Next item on the agenda is item 7B, opportunities to return on investment in the annual budget, employee development training, including leveraging the use of generative artificial intelligence. And that I will transfer to the administrator.
So I'll be real brief. I asked to add this to the agenda before I was as far through the budget preparation as I am now. It's suffice to say, at least from my perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunities for local governments relative to generative AI. And I put 2 articles in from the National Association of Counties that just kind of allude to that. And you'll all, as supervisors, have the opportunity to attend or at least take in various presentations from NACO or WCA on this topic. Quite honestly, I don't have funds within the budget to undertake any, put together a plan to utilize significant funds to leverage those things. I had hoped to engage you in a discussion about what would be a meaningful investment or what thoughts, if any, this committee had. But I think we can do that during the year. The budget is, of course, a living, breathing document as opposed to something that is set in stone. But if you do have any thoughts relative to the use of generative AI and opportunities for us, please reach out. I do think it's a significant area of opportunity within particularly a lot of our administrative functions that we do. But I think, Mr. Chair, unless people have thoughts they want to offer right now, my initial request to put it on the agenda for discussion relative to guidance in the budget discussions is we don't have the money to do that right now based on my where I'm at. But happy to hear any thoughts people have had or just uses that they've seen in their own private businesses or personal employment situations.
Well, I think two things. I mean, NACO has already developed a task force to look at AI and are going to have some recommendations as to, at some point, the appropriate uses, the concerns and potential litigation are, possible laws that need to be implemented for safety reasons, but also where there's opportunities for utilization, as is WCA. So I think there's more to be found or more to come on that, because it's clearly going to be there. As it's changed in some cases the education system. In some individuals I've seen, I seen one article that said teachers were no longer going to allow typed papers, and they were all had to be handwritten to be able to try. But also then I've seen that there was the ability to provide cursive in letters. But anyway, Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with you, what you said about education. Examples of papers being written and then teachers doing exactly that, where you do your work in the classroom with a piece of paper and a pen. So in addition, in the medical field, appointments, no-shows, things like that, where you can run AI to kind of re-engage patients and such. So there is a benefit. Obviously, NACO is going to do some of that work to figure out how it would fit our county, which is generally a good thing. So I'm generally supportive of that.
There's always there's two sides to every new technology, and it can be utilized to our detriment or utilized for the good. But moving on then, unless there's any other discussion. Okay, moving on to item number 7C, the appropriate use of Robert's Rules of Order to control an unruly person or audience to maintain decorum in a meeting. And I put this on for education purposes. So the executive committee is charged with, in most cases, running meetings. And in some cases, dealing with the general public and public comment. It is not to impugn anyone. It is just to say that what tools does each chair or acting chair have to utilize when you have an individual that in some cases is not practicing decorum or following the rules that are set out by this board and expectations that are set out by this board. So I put it on for education, and I asked the Corp Counsel, Michael Purner, to provide some background and education on what we can and can't do as chairs when we have that situation. This also was taken up partially in a webinar by WCA this last week about unruly board members and what the board can do when a board member gets out. So that one is on WCA's website for your own review if you choose to. But thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will admit, as part of preparing this presentation, I also reviewed the WCA webinar. I think it's a really good resource, so if you don't like what I have to say or want to hear it from another source, that's a really good source. Before I get into the slides, I just want to say, when you're chairing a meeting that it has particularly contentious public comment, I think your duty as a chairperson is really one of the hardest things you have to do, because we're not just an organization that runs by Robert's Rules. We're also a governmental body that's creating a public forum for debate. And when we create a limited public forum, there's First Amendment implications for anything we do. So I think those are really difficult times when you're tasked to make a decision. So I want to try to provide as much help and information as I can. So that's what I will do. At any point, if you have one of those meetings, I'm happy to run over and whisper in your ear or something similar to help if that is something that is needed. So some basic legalities about public comment. We talk about this from time to time. The public doesn't have a statutory or constitutional right to participate in meetings of governmental bodies, so we have a public comment period. That's not a constitutional or statutory requirement. However, once we have that rule that says we're allowing public comment during our educational meeting and at a committee meeting, there are constitutional issues that come into play because we're creating a forum for the public to engage with us. We have certain First Amendment implications that allow us or prevent us from taking certain action. The limited public forum means, pursuant to what our U.S. Supreme Court has found, that we can create certain limitations such as viewpoint neutral place, time, and manner restrictions on public comment speakers. And we can do that because we have an interest as a board and as committees in orderly administration of governmental business. So we can adopt rules that restrict the time, place, and manner of public comments if the goal of those rules is to protect our interest in getting government business done. But it's very important to note that our rules have to be viewpoint neutral. So we can't discriminate based upon the message or the viewpoint of a particular speaker. We can dictate where comment occurs. We can put into place time restrictions, which we have in our rules. We can enforce restrictions, for instance, on the use of obscenities or harassing statements. We cannot shut down comments solely because we don't like them or because we disagree with them. We can prohibit comments if they're not germane to the committee's jurisdiction or to an agenda item of the full board. That's a very clear distinction, though. We can't say something is not germane because we don't like it. But if it's truly not germane to any agenda item, or if it's truly not germane to something that the committee has under its jurisdiction, then we can, because we have a rule that says that's not allowed. To get into our rules a bit in a bit more detail, Rule 3A in our board rules currently reads to allow the chair of the board as well as all committee chairs. One of your requirements as a committee chair is to preserve order and decorum. You're also required to implement the rules of parliamentary procedure. Robert's Rules is the default if we don't have a rule that says something different. I want to note that one of the reasons that your role as a committee chair is challenging at times is because ultimately you have to make the decision, right, in the moment of, is this person in order or out of order? As the board's parliamentarian, I can give you advice, but ultimately I can't make the decision. I don't have the power to do it. You have the power to do it. Some of the applicable rules in Roberts are, of course, remarks being germane to what's being discussed. Comments being directed to the chair is just a general Roberts Rule piece, not directing comments to specific supervisors or individuals in the gallery. Avoiding injecting personal tone into debate or refraining from disturbing the assembly. Those are all general guidelines that Roberts puts into place, not only about public comment, but actually about debate by the body as well. This is really small, so I'll just summarize and say Rule 9 also goes through specific rules relative to public comment. That's where we say any person who wishes to address the county board has to be relative to an item on the agenda. If you're addressing a committee, it has to be relevant to a topic within the jurisdiction of the body. We also have the Rule 9E, which gives the chair the discretion to apportion, limit, or extend time for public comment according to the number of persons wishing to speak. We do have a rule, Rule 10, that says in our county board educational meetings, 15 minutes is generally our public comment time limit. We don't have a similar rule for committees. So that's a different topic for rules review, perhaps. There's actually a case out of the Fourth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals that upholds rules that are similar to our rule that says, hey, if you're making a public comment, it has to be germane to an item on the agenda. The Fourth Circuit says that's okay, constitutional, that's good. There's not a ton of case law in this area, so the fact that there is case law makes me feel good that we have that rule. When we talk about what is germane, that it has to be relevant to a subject under consideration. For committees, relevant to the subjects of that committee's jurisdiction. So if you have a commenter who is commenting about something and it's not clear at all how it relates to something that's under the committee's jurisdiction, it is within your power and actually a duty of you as the committee chair to, hey, ask the speaker to explain how are your comments germane to what the committee's jurisdiction is. If they can't link to it, we'll talk about what the committee chairs can do as a result of that. So actually, the next slide, how to handle obscene, disruptive, or not germane speech. Speakers during public comment can be silenced if they're being disruptive or threatening, or if their comment is not germane to an agenda item or not germane to the jurisdiction of the committee. But we can't exclude speech that would otherwise be permissible under the First Amendment. If we do that, the county is liable for damages under violating the First Amendment. So I'm just giving another plug to rules review. I'm plugging away, apparently. I think it might be wise to consider requiring a speaker at public comment to adopt a respectful tone, contributing to an environment of civility at a board level. I took this right from that WCA discussion because I think that is not currently in our rules. It's implied, I think, in any commenting sphere is that you would assume someone's going to use that definition of decorum, but if we actually have it in our rules, I think we're better suited to deal with these types of issues. If are speakers who are using obscenities or disrupting a meeting, or if they continue to address a topic that's not germane, they can be declared out of order. The chair can ask them to keep their comments respectful and germane, warn them about cutting them off and ending their public comment period. They can declare that their comment period has expired. In circumstances where someone is just continuing and you feel like, I can't stop this person, it is okay to call for a recess, allow things to simmer down. In extreme cases, the chair can actually entertain a motion to adjourn a meeting, which ends public comment, ends everything, and allows us to set a meeting at a different time and potentially look at how we address that public comment. A recommendation for if a speaker's comment is not germane is asking the speaker to explain, again, how are your comments germane to an agenda item or to a subject under the committee's jurisdiction. Put it on the commenter to bring it around. If they can't, tell them that their time is expired. Those are permissible under the First Amendment because they're viewpoint neutral. You're not restricting their freedom of speech, but you're asking them to hold to the rules of the body. So I think that's a good suggestion. Other advice, again, plugging for rules. If you have specific expectations of how public commenters should and shouldn't act, codifying them in our rules might be something for us to consider. Additionally, when we have a public comment period, I think we've done this in the past and I found a lot of benefit from it. Outlining the expectations to the commenters prior to the public comment period is really important. We're expecting the comments to be civil, germane to a topic on the agenda item. Here's what will happen if you don't follow through with these expectations. And reminding the gallery and speakers during the public comment period, if you're going to continue to disrupt the meeting, we may have to end public comment, adjourn the meeting in extreme cases. Those are important things to remind them of. This is an actual rule that was upheld by a court. It prohibited members of an audience from engaging in disorderly, disruptive, disturbing, delaying, or boisterous conduct such as, but not limited to, hand clapping, stopping of feet, whistling, making noise, use of profane language or obscene gestures, yelling or similar demonstrations which conduct substantially interrupts, delays, or disturbs the peace and good order of the proceedings. In a government context, a court found that this was okay, didn't violate the First Amendment. I'm not suggesting that you adopt this word for word, but it's just a thought of maybe how our rules could be beefed up. As far as enforcing rules of decorum, you're the lucky chairs. It is your job under Robert's rules and under our rules to enforce the rules of decorum. I really think it's advisable when you have public commenters to explain what the expectations are of the body prior to that public comment period starting. Advising speakers about how their comments are out of order if they get to that point, and directing them on how to bring their comments in line with the rules is also suggested. At some point, declaring speakers out of order is appropriate, and certainly you can consult with the parliamentarian, me, when I'm present, including asking for a recess to do that, so that it gives you some time to figure out how to handle things. It's really about striking a balance as the chair of a committee or a board. We have this public comment period to give the public the opportunity for meaningful input into what we're doing. On the other hand, we can't allow the public comment period to disrupt the business of government. So how do you strike that balance? Sometimes it can be very difficult. Some of these things are very subjective as far as what is obscene, what is an obscene comment? Really looking at, is this comment germane to anything that the committee is taking up? I think that's what oftentimes you're going to rely on. There could be a particular commenter, and I'll look at the case that brought this to us. I think the particular commenter was making comments about linking a person's religion to their role in the federal government. How was that germane to something under the jurisdiction of that committee? That would be what we would link to. Just because we don't like what somebody has to say, though, we can't just say, well, we don't like what you have to say, so stop saying it. That would get us in trouble. Discipline of guests is, again, because we have the First Amendment, it's not like Robert's rules. Roberts actually says you can appoint a committee of people to to take somebody out of a room. Well, we have the First Amendment, right? So we can't just pull people out of the room if we don't like what they're saying. Maintaining a calm, deliberate tone, but also being firm with the commenter is very important. Avoiding drowning out or gaveling down someone who's disorderly is recommended in Robert's rules, but I think at a point when you need to move on and you're not getting your point across, it is okay if you're trying to move on to the next order of business. Redirecting a speaker to make comments germane to a particular agenda item, I think, is a great idea. There are going to be points potentially when your speaker may not want to listen to you. Robert's rules, again, allows a chair to require non-members to leave the meeting. There are constitutional concerns with that. During public comment, citizens don't have the First Amendment right to disrupt our business, but they do have First Amendment protections as to the content of their speech. I think it's very important for us to use all the tools we have before contemplating removal, admonishing the speaker, declaring them out of order, recessing the meeting, even adjourning the meeting if something is completely out of control is more preferable than removal. If we got to the point where someone is conducting themselves in a way that would violate disorderly conduct statutes, that is when, if the law is being broken, that is when our court security would be able to be involved. But they're not going to be able to come in and just remove someone without an actual law being broken. So, in summary, it's a very difficult job when you have a difficult public comment period. I think you use your best judgment and you do the best that you can to enforce what you would want to see if you were sitting out in the gallery. Make sure people are feeling comfortable and safe. We have the tools of recess and adjournment if we get to the point where we can't control what's going on. We have court security here to make us all, to have us all be safe. They are a resource. They're not someone who can just shut down public comment, but they can assist us if something is bordering on the criminal area. So those are my recommendations and thoughts for rules review and thoughts for this body as well.
Questions? Any questions by, one of the things that I took away from at least the WCA information webinar about, decorum is, and Mike said it very well. This is the body is doing the business of the body. And if we don't have, so on a voters meeting, we don't have public comment, then we don't, the First Amendment rights don't arise to the individual in the gallery. But once we put we put it on the agenda for public comment, we have to abide by that. So we've got to be careful. Do we really, where is it that we want public comment, and when do we want public comment, and when do we seek public comment? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Michael, for that. I think that's great information. One kind of request would be if there were a one sheet of some of those critical issues, critical information to give to all chairs and vice chairs to have at their stead during a meeting. That might be helpful. Additionally, perhaps a handout for the people who are publicly commenting, coming in, that to explain to them maybe some of the decorum rules might be helpful, so that they at least understand that if the chair is going to take an action, why, might at least limit some of the reaction. Another thought would be the microphone is off on the side facing the group. I wonder if the microphone should be in the middle, facing forward, facing the chair, so that the person is now talking directly to the chair, as opposed to feeling like they need to be directing their comment towards everybody, and then seeing people's reactions
And feeding off
would
of
be
that.
another thought. And then one other thing, something we had on the school board that came up years ago and through the WASB was, making a statement or having something maybe in that document that, although you have the First Amendment right to speak, you don't necessarily get the protections of the First Amendment for the things you say. So if you come up there and you start saying that, oh, I know that Chair Gibbs is breaking the law and, starting to create, there's no protection for people for that. So those are kind of my four thoughts, but I think this information is great.
Supervisor Mask, please.
So going to the disorderly conduct, God forbid we ever have to have that issue come up, who determines that? Do we have to have a deputy in the room to declare that the person making public comment? I mean, we can't do that.
Right. I mean, if we get to the point of someone being removed, court security would be the entity, and they would have to make the determination based on what is going on. Do we feel like there is a criminal violation here? They're going to have to make that determination. We as a body can say you're out of order. We can say you're violating our rules.
We're going to take adjournment.
I wouldn't suggest that any of us appoint a committee to pull someone out of this room. I mean, that would be a terrible idea. The liability makes me want to vomit. So I really think it's a determination, like you said, the deputy would be in the room and would have to see, based on the circumstances, is the law being broken?
When we've had consideration of possible disruption, we've had deputies in the back of the room. I mean, I felt very comfortable with that. I don't know if the public did, but I did feel very comfortable with that, and I would like to see that always when we have contentious things coming up, so that there is that, deterrent. Thank you.
Other discussion? Other discussion? I think the one part that enlightened me a little bit was, providing the context prior to going into public comment and saying, these are the expectations. And I appreciate the backup being, here's you're a public commenter, here's the decorum rules that we, as a handout to those individuals prior to them coming up. But I think also, because there's also other people in the room that may choose to applaud, cheer, what have you, if we set those expectations that we're not going to accept applause at the, during a speech or at the end of a speech, I think that moves a long ways towards not having those disruptions in the meeting. Supervisor Arstead, please.
It's super.
Thank you, Michael. Great job. And also your comments, the four comments that you made, excellent. As you all know, it was difficult the other night, and I think I did the best I could. And it's good to know that there are First Amendment rights, and this was taken while this was taking place. It was hard to understand where the comments were coming from. And I did question that with the public speaker. And had I known some of these options, maybe things would have been directed a little differently. But I do feel that it was controlled to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Again, this wasn't put on to be critical of anybody. It was put on so everyone has the opportunity of the education that, because there's new supervisors and new chairs, and I think there's things that even I have learned that are tools and roles and responsibilities. So again, please don't take it the wrong. I was not targeting any individual and how they ran a meeting. I just think it's an opportunity for us all to learn and move forward. Other discussion?
Supervisor Lemmer.
Supervisor Lemmer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Supervisor Dickinson, and Supervisor Arstead. I was at the meeting and felt great sadness for the whole situation. In public comment, we don't generally respond. I've not seen that. I assume that's some sort of a rule. But in this case, I think the comments were of great harm to certain religious group, the Jewish population. In this case, I identify as Catholic. It would have bothered me if somebody brought up my Catholicness. What is the role of the body to stand up and say, no, we don't agree with this? Because I think in our silence, there's a sense of advocacy of it or tolerance of it. And I think our body needs to separate ourselves from that. How is there a way to do that with public comment? It took all my effort to not stand up and say, stop it. And that would have made me one of those unruly board members that the WCA just addressed last time in the board meeting. So is it appropriate for us as a body, maybe it's the chair, I don't know, maybe that was somebody else, to make a public statement after the fact that we disagree with, and that doesn't represent us?
Michael, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I completely understand the feeling that you need to react in the moment. I do understand that, and I think that's a natural feeling. However, I think the role of the board or a committee is actually to not respond at all to public comment. Once we engage, we are talking about an item that's not been properly agendized. We have some potential open meetings issues, and engaging is not the point of public comment. Public comment is the opportunity for the public to provide their input. It is not noticed for a debate by the board or a committee, so I actually feel very strongly that we should not respond as a board or as individual board members when that is happening. I think the chair has to do the best that they can do to explain that this comment is out of order and to explain the consequences. And then if it gets to the point where the commenter is out of control, there are those other tools that we talked about. But I really don't think legally it would be wise to respond to a commenter. I think that's kind of against open meetings law and just generally how we have that public comment period agendized.
Supervisor Mask?
Thank you. It's my understanding that we are not supposed to engage anything with people making public comment, even the chair. Am I correct? So I've been at meetings where the chair has engaged, or someone from the board or the committee. I'm on a couple boards and committees. So where they've engaged the public commenting, the person doing the public comment. But does that rule, is that for just standing committees, or is that for our commissions and our boards too?
I think that would go for any of our commissions, boards, the full
So-
board.
Okay. I thought it was out of order, but I wasn't going to embarrass anybody at the time. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Am I, in addressing that, is it fair to say, though, there are certain practices that boards may take up where they can engage with a public commenter, typically through a chair, to ask for clarifying questions? You know, can you clarify now? Unless it's explicitly stated, that's my understanding. Maybe that's,
Would there be a way to agendize it so that could occur? Yes. However, we also have particular county board rules that talk about when the public is allowed to engage in debate. There has to be a very specific route followed there. So it would, I think, require first a rules change. I've been talking about rules all night, I feel like. A rules change and also just a different way to agendize it. It would be something I'd have to look into to see how we would need to phrase it. But I think you're right that there is a mechanism for that if the board chose to do it.
Other discussion? Other discussion? Okay. Thank you, Michael. Great job. Moving on to item 7D, a discussion and consideration of process to be used on a request from Wisconsin RNG VDG LLC seeking initial resolution regarding solid waste disposal revenue bond financing for the renewable natural gas production plant project. The reason I put this on the agenda, we had a legal firm reach out to Marathon County and ask if we would take up the topic of issuing a revenue bonds for a renewable natural gas and project, and in the packet was the documentation. I asked in discussion this with the administrator, wanted to seek the input of the committee as to where and what committees you would, if there's multiple committees that you'd want this to be referred to, because there is state statute, PFA, Public Finance Authority, normally is the venue that does some of these finance bonds, but in this case, the legal firm has reached out directly to the county and wanting the county to take this up. This is a financing for a renewable natural gas digester on a large dairy farm in Marathon County, and so that's and I throw it out to Mr. Leonard, the Administrator Leonard, to provide any additional context.
I don't have much to add other than I got this call the first week of this month, so recognizing and speaking with the chair, this is I mean, you don't need to read very far through the documents to see this is a very significant project that this firm is seeking to undertake, and as the chair alluded to, there is a Wisconsin statute that at least based on my cursory review, and I know Mike's going to have to look at it as well, 66.1103 that relates to industrial development revenue bonding that appears to relate to the specific request that is going to be before the county board. I can let you know that they initially contact me again the first week of September, and we're hoping to have this through the county board this month. I advised them that it was likely to take a bit more time than that, and you can see from their request they're asking that it be that this review take place and the board take action on an initial resolution regarding those revenue bonds in October. So somewhat similarly to one of our earlier items, really, I reached out to the chair, and I know the chair is looking for some guidance, as am I. This is a significant project. What's the process through the board? And that's really more of the Chair Gibbs question. But what, if anything, are you looking for from staff in terms of additional information? I can tell you that I have not ever done one of these initial revenue bond resolutions. The closest, of course, that I think we can all draw experience from is our experience with bug tussle. But that is a little bit different than certainly what is envisioned here. As the chair referenced, there is the Public Finance Authority that typically deals with similar sort of projects. However, the reason, as I understand it, why the entity is seeking the county board as the conduit through which the revenue bond would be issued is that the bond then is tax exempt, as opposed to the process through Public Finance Authority, where that bond is not tax exempt.
Discussion. Supervisor Robinson.
So I had a brief opportunity to talk with the administrator, and I guess that I'd like to see this go at least to Human Resources, Finance, and Property. While there seems to be the ability to, I think you'll see, we made the comment, we'll have it for 3 seconds. I think we'll have the proceeds for a little bit longer than 3. But I just want to make sure that there are not ramifications on the county's bond rating associated with it. This is a situation where a Delaware corporation has been created to basically develop appears to be able to lease land from the Vandergeest and harness their manure and generate energy from that, which is a laudable goal, and I think would help with some of the neighborhood issues relative to odor. The question is, where's the risk to the county? I think we would want to have a discussion with our finance people and make sure that we unintentionally don't create an impact. And the other issue that I would like to see is there are some expectations relative to initial resolution, a final resolution, holding a hearing, management of the documents, and they are accessing lower than market interest because of the tax exempt portion. I think there's an expectation that we would see some money. In the case of Bug Tussle, it was a case where we were part of a 5-county bond issue. About $25 million was in Marathon County. And we have responsibility if they default to pick that up. But so we went in and sought guarantees and we're protected from that. And we also receive 40 basis points on any outstanding indebtedness. So we have a financial return in that. This is somewhat different, but it isn't in some ways. So I think what we'd want to do is look at what are the pluses and minuses, and I think the plus is to deal with an environmental issue and an odor issue and generate power. The unknowns are, will it potentially impact us, and what is the burden on staff that we don't, we don't have all these excess hours just waiting to be used by other parties. What are the demands that will be made on the clerk, on the attorney, on the administrator, and others within county government, and then develop policy going forward. We've done things along this line in the past in a few cases, but with different nuances. So I think having a policy going forward would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think the one issue that I can remember, Foremost Farms down in Rothschild, we had a conduit bond for their facility upgrade, a $10 million bond or thereabouts, I remember, when I first came on the board several years ago. And then I think the other question is Corp Counsel, or do we want to look at outside expertise? And I'm not trying to be critical of our Corp Counsel. Is the Corp Counsel comfortable reviewing and ensuring the things that you're referring to, liability? Are we in any way liable for the debt issuance, and does it affect our bond rating? Is there any clawback provisions? And so they indicate, and the lawyers that are representing the entity are saying no, but I think we have to do our due diligence to protect the taxpayers, so that we're not on the line for the taxpayers, not on the line for any part of this $45 million. So I guess I would, do we need outside counsel to help review this documentation? That would be the other thing that I would suggest that we look at. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Just follow up on that. We did that with Bug Tussle. We retained, and they paid for
right
that review, independent review. So I think that would be consistent with our past practice, and strongly encourage us to do so, because it is that whole issue of municipal bonding and indebtedness, and is a very specialized area where you see relatively few law firms doing it, and it's very complicated. It's the one thing I learned as a all-powerful co-chair of the Joint Survey Committee on Debt Management.
Supervisor Mass, please.
Thank you. I understand the basic concept of this, however, it's way above my pay grade. But I think if this goes through, my question is, if they are going to be saving so much money on interest and being tax exempt, do we get some kickback? Does the county get something out of this too?
Well, that's definitely something that could be negotiated. It's part of the negotiation strategy that would be looked at. I would clearly, I mean, the county's still facilitating it. Without the counties facilitating it, that it's not an option. So I think there should be some consideration to the taxpayers of Marathon County.
I think that there would be very follow-up too. What about extension, education, economic development? Should it go to that committee also, just for review? I totally agree it needs to go to finance.
We can send it to both committees, because more people looking at it, the better. Any other suggestions, any other committees? All right, well, we'll have it forwarded to Extension Education, HR Finance, and also potentially, depending on how far it gets developed, have outside counsel review the documents to ensure that the taxpayers of Marathon County are protected. Okay. Anything else? Any other discussion on that agenda item? Okay, next meeting is October 12th at 3 p.m. Here. Committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. And with that, Supervisor Robinson, please.
I just wanted to raise an issue that came up yesterday at HR Finance relative to the budget, because we're here, and I'll be very brief. But there is some question about whether or not the budget will be prepared in time for the meeting on the 26th, and we're going to be reviewing the status next week and making a decision. It may require. I think that the feeling of the committee is that we want the documents in the hands of the members when it's presented, and we're working with the administrator. He's hopeful that he can get it done in time, but I just want to raise the possibility that we may need to push it out a little bit, and we would then defer that public informational meeting until such time as the budget is prepared.
On that simple note, I think the implementation of Workday. I think if Workday were fully implemented last year, I think we'd be in a whole different position to be able to meet those expectations. Again, we've accelerated those expectations at the board's request and put those expectations on the administrator. But again, I think some of the challenges that we have with fully implementing phase 2 of Workday is upon us, and so that becomes a challenge. Any other announcements and/or requests? Okay, we're down to item number 9. What is your pleasure?
McEwen, move to adjourn.
Vice Chair McEwen with a motion and seconded by Supervisor Dickinson. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed. And I would like to personally wish, and on behalf of the committee, wish Vice Chair McEwen well on his next endeavor on the 20th. So thank you.